she thought must have been the case. She could not bend down without coughing a little. In high school, though, she was first in gymnastics, never out of breath. Was it so long ago? 25 years. 25 years were nothing. It seemed to her only yesterday that she was hesitating between a free life and marriage. Only yesterday that she had felt such anguish at the thought that perhaps one day she would grow old alone. She was not alone. And that law student who never wanted to leave her was now at her side. She had accepted him in the end, although he was a little short, and she did not much like his hungry, sudden laugh or his dark, protruding eyes. But she loved his courage to live, which he shared with the French of this country. She also loved his downcast air when events or men belied his expectations. Above all, she loved being loved, and he had flooded her with attentions, making her feel so often that she existed for him. He made her existence real. No, she was not alone. The bus, with great warning honks, found its way through invisible obstacles. Inside, however, no one moved. Janine suddenly felt that someone was looking at her and turned toward the bench that was the extension of hers across the aisle. He was not an Arab, and she was surprised not to have noticed him at their departure. He wore the uniform of the French Legion of the Sahara, and a képi of greyish-brown cloth on his tanned face, which was long and pointed like a jackal's. He examined her with his clear eyes, staring silently. She blushed all of a sudden, and turned back toward her husband, who continued to gaze before him into the fog and wind. She wrapped herself up snugly in her coat, but she could still see the French soldier, tall and thin, so thin in his close-fitting tunic that he seemed made of some dry and crumbling matter, a mixture of sand and bone. It was at this moment that she saw the thin hands and sunburned faces of the Arabs in front of her, and she noticed that despite their ample clothing, they seemed to have plenty of room on the benches where she and her husband were barely perched. She pulled the lapels of her coat closer. Yet she was not so heavy, but tall and full, fleshy and still desirable. She certainly felt it in men's gazes, with her rather childish face, her bright, clear eyes in contrast to this big body that was, she knew, warm and welcoming. No, nothing was the way she had imagined. When Marcel had wanted to take her along on his trip, she had protested. He had pondered this journey for a long time, since the end of the war, to be precise, around the time when commerce had returned to normal. Before the war, the small fabric business he had taken over from his parents when he had given up his legal studies had made them a decent living. On the coast, the early years could be happy. But he had not much liked physical effort, and very quickly he had stopped taking her to the beach. The little car took them out of town only for their Sunday drive. The rest of the time he preferred his shop of multicolored fabrics in the shade of the arcades of this half-native, half-European quarter. They lived above the boutique in 3 rooms decorated with Arab hangings and middle-class furniture. They had not had children. The years had passed in the shadows they had maintained behind the half-closed shutters. Summer, the beaches, the drives, even the sky were long ago. Nothing but his business seemed to interest Marcel. She believed she had discovered his true passion, which was money, and she did not like this without exactly knowing why. After all, it was to her advantage. He was not miserly. On the contrary, he was generous, especially with her. "If anything happens to me," he would say, "you'll be protected." And indeed one must be protected from need. But more than that, aside from the simplest needs, where would she find protection?